Thank you very much for organizing and hosting these films on the platform. It's been really good to have a chance to work with video and film work. And thank you to all the artists who accepted this kind of curation that Mania put on her platform and asked me to contribute some films. You know, for me, I've become very aware that, especially in the last couple years, the way that I'm using video in my life, in my day to day, is very different. Um, and often I'm having to use the same device, either my phone or my laptop, as a way of communicating, as a way of working, as a way of entertainment, or just scrolling mindlessly, and at the same time also um, looking for inspiration and doing research. And all of these different functions now are kind of being completed on the same device, but in multiple locations. And so, with everyone here, I've known of your works for different timescales. So I've experienced some of the works more recently, and those are especially true for Nikolai and Olivia and Molly, who I met during my time teaching on the Goldsmiths um, visual art program with artist moving image. And I was very lucky to be able to attend your degree show in the previous one that just went this year. I started the relationship over Zoom, actually, like how we're talking now. I got to see some of your work online, and then it was really interesting to then see that work installed physically and to see a kind of an expanded way of addressing what does it mean as an artist to be working in moving image. And I realized that the expanded version, which had a physical installation, really brought the work to life. However, the many of the kind of details of the work and the feelings in the work were still conveyed to me when I was accessing it on my screen or over Zoom even. And I found that really interesting, that the, how I had been able to engage with the work, and it informed my decision to um, ask you to make submissions. And I'm really glad that you were all able to contribute to this platform. And also with John and Arsalan, I know you both slightly longer through various ways. John and we studied together at Central St. Martin's, and Arsalan's practice initially, I met him many years ago as a photographer, a writer, and then I'm starting to see his films as well. So that way, I would also there's this kind of transitional process, and I think with John's work, it's the longest piece in the selection. It's a feature-length documentary style piece, and I just felt like it really captured a lot of the sentiment of how John navigates the world and his way of kind of making relationships and kind of almost, you're not sure the position that he is playing. Like in terms of whether he's the antagonist or he's following someone who is the antagonist. It's always this kind of ambiguity, and I find that with this kind of online visual culture where you have things like vlogging and even like influencers, etc., we kind of buy into these characters. And I thought John was doing almost a kind of reverse process of this in real life, almost kind of trying to set this up in a very different set of circumstances. So that for me is very interesting. And with Arslan's work, I think there's something in there which is kind of much more about the self-consciousness of the way that we are using these devices and the way that we are engaging with this type of media, how it's quite self-reflective, and at the same time um, kind of asking these questions around dissociation and the remedies of that situation. So for me, all of these things felt very relevant, especially in the last couple of years of accessing film and online material. And I really wanted to see how I could create a space by picking these films or these filmmakers in a way to kind of figure out together what is the role of moving image, um, kind of going forwards, especially on a platform such as this where we have a kind of on-demand access to the media, and kind of we get to choose how we engage with it, and gives us many options. So yeah, this was really my thinking, and thank you to everyone who was happy to be involved. Sure. Thank you very much for organizing and hosting these films on the platform. It's been really good to have a chance to work with video and film work. And thank you to all the artists who accepted this kind of curation that Mania put on her platform and asked me to contribute some films. You know, for me, I've become very aware that, especially in the last couple of years, the way that I'm using video in my life, in my day to day, is very different. Um, and often I'm having to use the same device, either my phone or my laptop, as a way of communicating, as a way of working, as a way of entertainment, or just scrolling mindlessly, and at the same time also um, looking for inspiration and doing research, and all of these different functions now are kind of being completed on the same device, but in multiple locations. And so, with everyone here, I've known of your works for different timescales. So I've experienced some of the works more recently, and those are especially true for Nikolai and Olivia and Molly, who I met during my time teaching on the Goldsmiths um, visual art program with artist moving image. And I was very lucky to be able to attend your degree show in the previous one that just went this year. And so I started the relationship of Zoom, actually, like how we're talking now. I got to see some of your work online, and then it was really interesting to then see that work installed physically, and to see a kind of an expanded way of addressing what does it mean as an artist to be working in moving image. And I realized that the expanded version, which had a physical installation, really uh, brought the work to life. However, the many of the kind of details of the work and the feelings in the work were still conveyed to me when I was accessing it on my screen or over Zoom even. And I found that really interesting, that the, how I had been able to engage with the work, and it informed my decision to um, ask you to make submissions. And I'm really glad that you were all able to contribute to this platform. And also with John and Arsalan, I know you both slightly longer through various ways. John and we studied together at Central St. Martin's, and Arsalan's practice initially, I met him many years ago as a photographer, a writer, and then I'm starting to see his films as well. So that way, I was also, I've kind of, there's this kind of transitional process. And I think with John's work, it's the longest piece in the selection. It's a feature-length documentary style piece, and I just felt like it really captured a lot of the sentiment of how John navigates the world, and his way of kind of making relationships, and kind of almost, you're not sure the position that he is playing. you know, like in terms of whether he's the antagonist or he's following someone who is the antagonist. It's always this kind of ambiguity, and I find that with this kind of online visual culture where you have things like vlogging and even you know like influencers, etc., we kind of buy into these characters, and I thought John was doing almost a kind of reverse process of this in real life, almost kind of trying to set this up in a very different set of circumstances. So that for me is very interesting. And with Arslan's work, I think there's something in there which is kind of much more about the self consciousness of the way that we are using these devices and the way that we are engaging with this type of media, how it's quite self reflective and at the same time, um, kind of asking these questions around dissociation and the remedies of that situation. So for me, all of these things felt very relevant, especially in the last couple of years of accessing film and online material. And I really wanted to see how I could create a space by picking these films or these filmmakers in a way to kind of figure out together what is the role of moving image, um, kind of going forwards, especially on a platform such as this where we have a kind of on-demand access to the media, and kind of we get to choose how we engage with it, and gives us many options. So yeah, this was really my thinking, and thank you to everyone who was happy to be involved.
Thank you so much for this, for the opportunity to show the work at Cryptofiction, and thank you to ABBAS for choosing the work. Yeah, so I made a couple of notes before this, so please stop me if I'm talking for too long. But so my work, Flags of Love, is a short video piece which is maybe like 2 minutes long, but it's part of a larger installation of a work that I made called Love Wins, and that is comprised of an installation of video works as well as audio work and sculpture. And so when I like sent ABBAS my works, and he chose Flags of Love, the video of just the flags, I was a little nervous about showing just that work by itself, but I saw this meme from Freeze this week, I think last week, which was, and I know you've been working with Freeze on this kind of meme production of us, and it was the masculine urge to make flags as art, and I think this is what I was nervous about showing just the flags part of the work, is because it speaks to kind of like a history of violence and dominance and like oppression and ownership also, which I didn't really want to speak to, but I thought this was quite a nice point to kind of highlight about when you're thinking through works, like the kind of anxieties behind making that work, or maybe you don't always make the work right, and that's also okay, but kind of being open and listening to it. So yeah, I think that's very much not what I wanted the work to be about, but I think it kind of puts me in the footing to then explain what the work is about for me. So I've grown up in Croydon in southeast London, and I still live here now. And so the video work is films of these flags that I've made, blowing in this car park in Croydon, which I spent quite a lot of the year visiting. And it's kind of, I kind of was drawn to exploring this space and what kind of this home held for me. And it's for me about like drifting within this space. So there's a couple of things I want to kind of speak about what the flags resemble to me. So I was thinking about it earlier, and I didn't really have this idea before when I was making the work, but they're kind of like a love letter to the ends. And if you've grown up in London, you kind of know what I'm referencing by the ends. And it's this idea that kind of in the suburbs, there's something that's not held at the center. And I think that's quite like apt also for the art world, that the art world holds this kind of center. And I'm kind of interested in what's held in these suburbs that exists at the edges, that's kind of looked past. So I guess that's why I was like revisiting the site of the car parks so much, because it kind of held, it was a site that held that kind of information and space for me. And I kind of also think of it's like, they're kind of like love letters to my exes that I've fallen in love with in the space of Croydon, and how in this kind of like harsh urban space that you can like hold on to these kind of softer, more tender feelings. And I guess also with this referencing like the suburbs, I want to reference the book Suburban Finesse by Ash Sharma, Kashif Sharma Patel and Azad Ashim Sharma. And that kind of explores the same idea of like topological movement in the suburbs and what is held at the suburbs. So yeah, and I think for me it was kind of reclaiming this idea of like psychogeography, which is quite about like white male dominance and kind of this movement around a city dictated to often by white males and quite academic. But how can you reclaim this, and how can all bodies be safe to drift in a space of a city? And I guess through my research of making this and reading and thinking through this all, I guess my conclusion was that for me, if the master's tools are like subjugation and control, that my tools are love and sexuality, and that's how I move through a space of a city, and that's how I can claim it to be something soft and sweet and hold space for different bodies or a female body. So yeah, and I think it's also, and I think people who have kind of grown up at the suburbs know that there's things that are looked past which aren't included, and kind of like a seeing and witnessing of that. And I think maybe one more thing I wanted to say also is that it's kind of an ode to my nan. In the larger work, Love Wins, there's an audio section which speaks about my nanny taught me to hang out a wash. And every time I do it now, I think of her. So this act of hanging out the flags, it wasn't about occupation. It was kind of like a passing through and a drifting through that space, and kind of, yeah, a flag of love and an ode to all the people that have held me in that space. Yeah, and I also wrote a little text piece which from ages ago, but I kind of think it speaks to this, which it is, I trawl back to the stifling mundanities of suburbia. Are you a suburban superstar? It's a loop. This space is a feedback loop to something I'm thinking through that's important to me, at least. So I guess that's what like the space of a car park kind of gave to me, a space to kind of like meditate on all these thoughts and kind of take flight out of this maybe mundane suburban reality. And how can you get wings from a space which you kind of feel pushed down in at times? So yeah, reclaiming some kind of power in that.
With the video, I mean, when you see it, you're probably going to think, what is this? Is this a wallpaper? Is this a screensaver? This is a very minimal intervention. It was filmed on my phone, and I wanted to resemble an infomercial, like with some teletext. I wanted to be very synchronized with the device that I use, and I also wanted to draw attention to the mode of creating and the sort of the feeling of anxiety that it creates and what that means once I start that process. Specifically, I wanted to investigate the idea of therapy as a remedy to the sort of neoliberal capitalist logic, which is defined around things like productivity, functioning, benchmarking. So, it's with all the, as a social science, there's so much terminology still, which is very diagnostic, which is not looking at things which are more organic and fluid and, things that we can understand. So your well-being is still measured quite scientifically. And so what I wanted to explore is something that I've been working on sort of before this process video, which is sort of disassociative realism. In a sense, like, we use our devices so much, and there's this sort of neurological dependency almost, like, this is our source, a primary source of our dopamine. And, for me, this is my nutrition, these are my supplements. When I'm not using my device for a certain amount of time, I have anxiety. And I have to, like, plan little breaks, go on a device holiday. So it's very much, it seems like it's very much a part of my body in the way that where I access my well-being, but it's also not a part of my body. And so this is also where I think of disassociativeness as a sort of social, cultural, psychological phenomena, which is not just on the level of diagnostics for trauma. So I wanted the video to really kind of capture the sense of foreboding, the sense of the ease in which a subject, which is now kind of almost ahistorical because it exists only online, that kind of melds with the device. It was Molly mentioned the center, and that was a really interesting way to describe, like, this idea of a suburb. And also, I think in a similar way with therapy, I think traditionally a lot of focus groups and research groups in therapy have been designed for sort of universities in America with a very certain kind of demographic, and those demographic are private paying students. And a lot of the case studies historically were done over there. So a lot of therapy, I think, has been designed and modeled around a certain demographic. And with things like culture and race and other sorts of traumas which come from the outskirts, how do our models of therapy, how are they designed, and when are they normalized? Say, for example, there was a conversation a couple of years ago around CBT, then around counseling, then behavioral activation, then interpersonal therapy, then EMDR, then mindfulness, then dialectical therapy. And I wanted to explore the gap between one of the scientific research and, what is happening kind of where we don't see it, unless you're a specialist. And then as that is normalized in sort of an everyday speech. So suddenly we're speaking of new forms in therapy, like this is the new therapy that, you're shopping for. And as a consumer, you realize, well, these are the problems you go through and this is what I need to address. And so again, that anxiety, that disassociativeness, your well-being is outside of you, your body is kind of outside of you. Yeah, I think I don't want to monologue, but so these are some of the things that I've kind of been thinking about, really I'm interested in having a conversation, a sort of a larger conversation around disassociation, because I feel with well-being, a lot of the conversation is now around anxiety and depression, whereas I feel like with disassociativeness and dissociative identity disorders, it doesn't seem to be like there's a lot of conversation around this. So I just wanted to ignite a little something small and tiny that can kind of explore this idea a bit more. Thank you for listening to me.
Chose was a film that I had made 3 years ago when I was living in Montreal in Canada. This was a film that I felt like I'd always just made for myself in a way. It was something that came from moving through an archive of photos that I have that I've taken over my life, and really almost like a letter to my home, I suppose. At the time I was living in Canada, but I had moved from Australia, where I'm from, and I think I was feeling very homesick and somewhat disconnected from my communities, I suppose, in Canada, and in them together and left it there. And then over the years since then, I've returned to it because it's felt like it was trying to say something to me that I couldn't quite understand, and I feel like I'm still trying to figure it out, which is this connection to like looking back or looking behind to something and trying to find its place in the present, I suppose. And so when ABBAS we had emailed each other, I was actually again removed from kind of my home space, and I had just learned of my grandmother's passing, and this in this 1.5-minute film that I have, it's got a few photos of my grandmother's hands, and it just felt like this very interesting kind of spiritual connection, I suppose, to remembering what she was and what her kind of physicality was, and how I might connect to that through memory. So yeah, I'm still kind of trying to figure out, I suppose, what it might mean in terms of the things that I'm thinking about and the research that I'm doing on other projects, particularly the stuff that I've just done through the masters. But you mentioned, Arsalan, the dissociativeness, and that's something I think that's really sort of driving or like centered to my work right now, this impression of dissociation that seems to be here with me and be in my community at all times, and kind of how do I work through that or respond to that? And so I'm trying to do it formally in ways, like kind of using fragmented photos or fragmented sound, and having that be the moving image practice, rather than like a sort of traditional filmmaking practice where I go.
Like it's necessity, like for our survival. And I guess this came from one of my many experiments with the material, and just seeing this shifting, this really beautiful rupturing transformation that's happening with the salt. And I guess it was an image that really stayed with me, and I wanted to work with and draw together like all this writing I've been doing this year, and bringing together all these different narratives around salt, personal anecdotes, got recipes in there and so on. And I'm trying to bring it all together and weave it into some larger narrative. And it's just, I guess, something about the constant transformation really captures me, and I just really wanted to put that out there.
You know that we have a neuron that ABBAS, I think ABBAS knows that we had a very famous.
Wrote a script about a horrible man walking on the streets of Vandre, where I was from, this suburb, which was named Vandre before. That's why the film's name is Nelson's Vandre. And once I was writing that script, because I was walking a lot, I met Nelson for the first time on a cycle, and he had these folded pants. And I didn't approach him that day. I went back home. I told my wife that I met Nelson, and she told me that I will never meet him again because you're in Bombay and there's so many people there. So she was right. It took me 3 months after that to find him. And when I found him, I told him I want to make a film about him. But he said to me that I'm a normal man. So I said, that's what I want to make a film about, hopefully. Then I also want to make a film about his surroundings and where he came from. But why would you want to make a film about a normal man, he said. I said, that's what I do. So he said, you need to come to this part of Vandre, which is called Bazaar Road, which is a slum, and find Nelson Rodriguez. That was his name. But the issue was he didn't give me his address. So it took me almost a week to find him in that slum. And then I found him and I realized I should throw my script and start making a film about him. So it became me building a story with him. And the whole film also opened up because he let me into his community, mainly because I was a Catholic and he was also an East Indian who was a Catholic. So he let me into his community. So I lived with them for 3 months and built the film. So, but then the biggest problem happened is I didn't know editing or anything of that nature. So it took me 4 years to edit the film. So that's why this film has taken so long to actually even be seen. So it was actually ABBAS who kind of told me when I was showing him the films which I was recently doing, he told me to show me something cinematic. I was like, oh, cinematic, yeah, that's what I used to do before. Now I don't do that anymore. So I brought that back. Yeah. So it was good that ABBAS told me, like, you know, now I'm just doing contemporary art, so I'm not doing film anymore. So I don't even watch that many films. But that was a time when I was obsessed with and informed by filmmakers like Vandre. And I thought I'll come to England and find him. I didn't, because I found contemporary art. That.
I just wanted something long. And, you know, and I knew John, he has this kind of obsessive stamina where he can make a very long film. And Nelson's Vandre is over 2 hours, right? It's a long film. Maybe 3 hours almost.
No. It was a 3-hour film before. Then I cut it down to 1 hour 50.
Yeah, I think the version I saw was 3 hours at one point. You showed me. Yeah. So I just knew in my head John has long, and I think for me film should be either very long or very short. My attention span is extreme. So, and I think this is one of the kind of things we're discussing now when we're talking about even body and public space, because like Arsalan said, the devices that we have is like extension of our bodies, and the public space in the last year or two, it was shrinking. You know, we were confined to our houses, to our spaces, you know, where we work at home, or, you know, if we are essential workers, we can go somewhere, but we have our phones with us and we use them to access a kind of public social space, whether it's social media or these platforms. And also at the same time, there's this kind of taking over of public space, like with Molly and the car park, and that kind of suburban architecture that's, you know, quite brutal in nature, and in the act of raising these flags and documenting these very personal moments, creating a very public display of love and affection, and also using symbols that are familiar. I know that Molly, you weren't so keen on the flags because of the connotations in an artistic sense, but I think you did it in a way where, for me, that didn't even come to mind. I didn't feel any of the cliches that we think about, because usually when people make flags, it's to represent something like a collective identity, whether that's a nation, whether it's a ethnicity or a religion, or something that is about power and authority. And in your case, I think it really comes across in the film that what you are displaying is really something very personal. It's very intimate, and it's just a short gesture that will disappear. You know, it's like fleeting, and like you said, it's about love and this sense of care that you feel in terms of how you negotiate that type of architecture and coming from that place. And that's something that I recognize in the film, even though it's so minimal. It was for me that kind of combination between how you navigate the space through your body and the connections you make, and that kind of public display, I thought is very powerful, and that's why I felt strongly to have this work. And I would say, you know, I can go on other examples, but I'll save that for the subsequent answers. yeah, first of all, I thought this kind of your work really encapsulated that combination of the body, the public, and this sense of a display.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really beautifully captured in words. Yeah, I think you like just innately understand it. Like, yeah, I don't know if I can say it any better, really, but yeah, definitely. I think it's also in the text that I supplied like alongside the work, that really in that text it also ties together this idea of the body to this kind of public space. Yeah.
Part of play without a fear of judgment. And so creating spaces in which we can unconsciously express ourselves creatively. And so in terms of a sort of like codified, limited, finite definition of art and art practice and art discourse as it ties in with the commodification of art, maybe not so much, but as something that exists as an alternative that is not participating. Because I feel like if you're using a trauma, utilizing it, and then participating in a system of commodifying that trauma, you're participating in a kind of neurosis, then, maybe you're not really addressing it. So I think it really depends on kind of like the ways and the spaces in which, that trauma is allowed to express itself, is allowed to mutate and change shape. And that isn't, being filtered or, adopted by the logic of, unfortunately, I'm going to say the word again, but capitalist. That is quite depressive. So yeah, I think it has a tremendous emancipatory appeal. And I think particularly for, people with PTSD or, severe kind of, childhood trauma, any kind of creative expression or, talk therapy, in which there's an element of interpersonal interaction and creativity. It takes maybe the pressure and the isolation away. And one of the things that I've learned a lot from ABBAS's practice is the sort of interconnected participatory aspect of his work, where everything seems, it's not just ABBAS in a vacuum creating, at least this is my interpretation, but almost with the whole community. And I feel like that way of collaborating or engaging with community and society, that has like tremendous therapeutic value.
We talk about dissociation often in a negative way, because just how much we are dissociating is hard to kind of make a case for it, but at the same time, I think there's a power in art that it can make us more sensitive to our surroundings, if we want to call it reality. And at the same time, it can dissociate us away from our surroundings. And I think both of these are actually necessary in how we navigate the world. This space for abstraction, transcendence, but a kind of abstraction that brings us back and makes us more sensitive to how we feel about the things that feel real. I think this is the kind of point we've got to now, is that the question of what is real and what is kind of what are we dissociating into something else. That's not really the question anymore. The question is more about what feels real, and how can we talk about the things that feel real. And for me, that I feel like all of the works that are being curated in this selection is really about this. And I think Arsalan's kind of touching on this point, and also this idea of the dissociative identity disorder is a very interesting one, because if you have multiple spaces to dissociate, you can explore different parts of your psychology. Like you can be different characters, you can be different people in different times in different places, and that also allows a kind of playfulness, which is quite similar to what children do, like when they have imaginary friends and things like this, which is, I think that playfulness is something that society tells us is wrong, but maybe in art we can find a way to be curious and express it in a helpful way. And I just want to touch on Olivia's comments as well, because I think Olivia and Nikolai for me were the two works that were the most photographic in a way. You know, Olivia's work is dealing directly with photography and even text, and I found that so interesting that this work it just fixed me, like, in a way. It was so kind of immediate, the effect of the work in terms of this sense of what I'm saying, like what feels real. That and I was it just I wasn't aware that actually there was a connection with your grandmother, and maybe there's something that was powerful that was conveyed in the time of making the work, where there's a kind of prescience. You know, you have a foresight of the significance of this work even before you realize it for yourself. And somehow I felt that in the work as well. And there's something really powerful in that. And with Nikolai's work as well, you know, the relationship with the skin and the body, and how salt is one of the most important aspects of life, if not the most aspect mineral. I think it's the most important mineral that you could argue from a medical perspective. And, you know, salt being in the ocean is how life evolved from that place. So all of these things feel very vital, and for me, there's something that kind of brings the conversation again. It's back to care, and even in all of the films. But I don't want to go too long. I just wanted to kind of touch on a few of these points before I forget. So yeah, thank you.
You mentioning what feels real really kind of puts me back into that place of kind of first making this film, because I think that there was a process of searching that was going on. I was kind of searching within these photographs that I just had of loved ones, searching for some kind of closeness to them, and some kind of physicality. And I'm always kind of questioning myself with my moving image practice and my photography practice. What is it about these mediums that I'm drawn to? Because they can be so not sensory and so not tactile, and I'm so drawn to kind of skin and touch and heat, and so I suppose, yeah, this work skin here was kind of an act of trying to bring those hands, or those, you know, the bodies attached to those hands as close to me as I possibly could, so close that I could perhaps touch them or reach out and shake their hand or touch their hand. And also, yeah, like, I think a lot about, I really am interested in using stills in moving image, and I'm sort of drawn to a playfulness actually with using stills, kind of like bringing in sort of an animation type sense. I had watched this film by Agnès Varda, a short film she made called Salut les Cubains, and it's a film just of photographs of her time in Cuba. I mean, I don't know why, maybe it was just a holiday that she was there for, but it was so playful, and it had just used these photos of bodies and faces and hands in time to music. And so I think I was just kind of thinking through, like, how can I bring a physicality into these photos that I just look at and just see a face, or see, yeah, a moment in time.
I mean, at least with film, I could start with film. We were stuck in so many narrative structures, and I was very excited about that for a long time. I spent, I would say, 7 to 8 years just reading and seeing a lot of films. But I think after meeting ABBAS in school and many other characters at school, that means at Central St. Martin's, the moving image kind of did not give me the enough bandwidth to go just outside just the blank screen. I think when I was able to start performing, singing, and making sound installations, I think the narrative was opening up a lot more. I could go to a street and even sell my wares, in a sense, which I couldn't really do so much with cinema, because we always stuck with the screen. So for me, that was very important. The transition was difficult because of my obsession with cinema. But I think when I started playing with different materials other than a screen, and that included like metal, sound, and even to a certain extent, my own body. So then things started to open up more. While in this film, I mean, since the previous question I couldn't answer because I thought I would, I was influenced by a lot of Nelson's hands and my wife's hands. My wife is the other character who is the writer. And she, using a lot of instances with their bodies, I was communicating a lot about their surroundings and their politic. Because mind you, at that point of time, we were hitting 2014, which was when Modi came in. So, and that was a time when my wife wanted to leave the country. So we were also transitioning at that point. So a lot of things were connected to where our politic was, in a sense. And not just our body or surrounding politic, it was our immediate politic, like whether we can survive there or not. So cinema was just like a space which was dying in India at the time. It was going through a really bad phase. So I had to find a medium quickly before it was too late. So I think contemporary art was that space. It lent me enough and more materials and forms to play with. So now I do performance art, singing, sound, whatever I can get my hands on, basically, and play with as quickly as possible. Also, just a point is, like, cinema is also very prescient. Like, you enter that dark room and you just feel it. But while in a performance, I can hide as well. I can just do things which are happening under a floorboard and annoy people, which I can't really do with cinema. You have to go into that space, that present space, or your TV screen or a small screen. With this, I can go out as well. I can transcend as well. That's what contemporary art gave me. It gave me the small minor corner, which I'm very excited by.
I just want to mention with Nikolai's film, the installation that he made for the degree show, he actually used physical salt and quite a lot of it. I can't remember exactly how many tons of salt did you use?
I think it was 1.3 or something like that.
So 1,300 kilograms of salt was in his installation. And,
really?
And
wow.
Yeah, I think you need to explain to us what happened. How did people respond to that space? Because I know it's not in the screening, but the film, we are just looking at salt. And I think we have to mention this kind of physical relationship that you created.
I mean, yeah, it was, I guess it was this, so we're talking about this dark space of the cinema room. And in some ways, like, I set up the installation like that, and you enter and there's this unease, people enter in and not knowing what's on the floor, what they're feeling, and slowly it dawns on them what this material could be. And there's this playfulness, this exploration, I guess, and some tasting as well sometimes. And that's,
Yeah, it's interesting because like you said, you feel like you're going in a cinema, and then you realize under your feet is not stable. It's like you're walking on sand. And then my first impulse was to take my phone and to use the torch to see what's on the floor. And then you just see mountains of salt everywhere. And it's quite unnerving. So I think it's very interesting that, in the film, you don't have that experience. But I mean, if someone wants to create it, you can put salt in your house and watch the film at the same time. Maybe you can do this. But really, the feeling of watching the film, you can feel the salt somehow because you see the crystals forming, and you're telling me this is all natural processes. You just documented it, right?
yeah, it was, like, and I really love the process, like, and I guess a lot of mine is informed by alchemy, and there's this like really wonderful tradition of like these deeper truths being teased out of these experiments, these material experiments, and just like you can really see that. But then you also, when you're seeing this macro footage, it's almost evocative of like larger like shifts in landscape over like large amounts of time and so on. I think that's what really grabs me about the process.
Also, I'd like to just say something about Nikolai's work. Salt is also very political in the Indian context, because we had this long march by Gandhi. He made us walk 240 kilometers to this place called Dandi, which is like a salt bed, massive salt bed, to kind of protest against obviously the colonization and stuff like that. So it's such a political material. When I didn't expect that, I don't want to tell your password, but that really hit me. Like when you send me your work, and I was like, I couldn't believe that was your password, because it's so political. It just hits us in a very different way, even though we're from different worlds. And a lot of my work comes from even readings of the partition, even though it's very abstract, but it's still part of it. So when you told Salt, it really hit me in a very different way. Thank you for that, Nikolai.
I primarily have been following ABBAS's work. I mean, I've just now had the opportunity to learn of the work that all of you are doing. But I wanted to just, briefly touch on the curatorial note, which I found quite interesting in the way that it sort of addresses, a hidden industry that has really been exposed during the pandemic, which is the care industry, and how that, often does not get the, attention or, visibility, in terms of many other sectors. And seeing the way that ABBAS is sort of exploring the intersection between, public health and art practice, and some of these processes which are not so visible, but are definitely happening in the background. So I really liked how the note kind of touched on that, that bridge between technology, particularly in a sort of a medical setting, and how that has a certain relationship as well.
I appreciate that, and I think it's something we're becoming much more aware of, and that's something that Arsalan's work deals with as well, the relationship between technology and health, especially mental health. And that's also, in the pandemic, a lot of people have been accessing therapy on Zoom, like this, and also using apps. So it's something that is going to be much more prevalent, and there's many kind of examples of this being explored. I just kind of want to also mention, having this kind of collaboration with Cryptofiction, with Mania, because I was very lucky that I was able to attend some of Mania's projects, before the pandemic, and seeing your films in the ICA, also seeing the program you curated in Berlin, and the way that you put the films together, very different kinds of moving image works. I think I learned a lot from these processes as well, just to understand really how you can bring an art film in a cinematic context. That was something that I never had seen before, and I think it's what encouraged me to try and almost create like a similar process, like a gallery process in the on demand, through this platform of Cryptofiction, like putting these different films together. It made me feel like it's really felt like, for me, I'm pushing how I engage with these devices, with these screens, etc. And each work is so different, but at the same time, the feeling I get from them I feel like it works together, and that's something that to see art films outside of the art context, I think is also very helpful. So not just like I like what you said before about if you're in a gallery, you have freedom, but also if you're at home, you have a lot of freedom as well. You can stop the film halfway, you can pause it, you can go cook your lunch and then go back and watch it again. So in a way, like what excites me about this platform is that really everyone's experience of the film is going to be very different. Everyone's experience of how they watch the film is completely unique to them, and maybe that's something that kind of feeds back into this idea of health and well-being, because we're understanding that even medicine is very particular to the person. One medicine might work for one person, another medicine it doesn't work for the other person, the same one. So for me, that's really interesting to think about art as having also almost this kind of personalized prescriptive ability, where it's like, this artwork is for you, this artwork is for you, this one you can watch it your own way, watch this one on a small screen, watch this one in a big screen. Like you can tell people like very detailed way of how to engage with the work. Is really,
I think it's a good time to make really small stories, like really minor stories, like finding people who are not really victorious, because history is usually written for the victors. So it's good to find failed and broken stories now, so that when you see it on small screens, it's more effective. That's what I feel. I cry now watching films on my mobile, so things have changed. Recently watched I watched a Bellatar film and cried on the mobile. So you can do it. I mean, he might be fine with it as well.